a tenet of Satanism was that humans are just as another animal.
Okay. All right. Got you. Got you.
But no, and in fact, the Church of Satan and Satanism in general, like, does not. That's one thing that I can give them credit for. They don't use animals and rituals. Uh,
That's
Hoodoo people do.
interesting.
Voodoo,
Right.
there's plenty of occult practices that do,
Interesting.
um, and that's it's because uh, when you're trying to concentrate something during a ritual, uh, being able to invoke the most powerful kind of like instantaneous, the more instant you can invoke powerful emotion, the more successful in theory these rituals are.
Hmm.
Which is why rituals revolving around hatred or lust are the most powerful because those emotions are easy to invoke.
Hmm.
Um, and the thought with using sacrifice, which typically is animal, is that the energy released during the death throw, like when something actually like dies, is a un it's an emotion that can't be replicated otherwise, which is why it was popular. But that is by and large gone away from any mainstream occult practices.
Interesting. You think it still happens though in the non-mainstream sex?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, no, definitely.
Hmm.
And awful ways, I'm sure, still including humans, but that is,
Yeah.
luckily something I don't know too much about.
So you were how old? You were how old when you got the Satanic Bible?
I was about 16.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, can you give like a brief overview of what that's about and what he's saying in it?
Yeah, it's been a minute since I cracked that book open, luckily. However, I know that it's broken up into, I believe, four books. There's the book of Satan, which is where he kind of like lays out the tenets of Satanism. Um, then the book of Lucifer, the book of Belial, and I know there's one more. Um, but it's essentially just his kind of bombastic philosophies, of man as having no masters, and that the world and the material world and the carnal is all that exists,
Hmm.
and that religion has kind of acted as a hindrance to man actualizing, uh, and indulging and experiencing the full extent of what the human experience has to offer, by way of abstinence or what have you. And so it heavily relies on the idea that there is no afterlife and there is no immaterial realm, um, because it's kind of sets the idea that what you do in the here and now is for your own self-service and caution to the wind, and nothing else matters. And so like what you do in the here and now will have no effect on any hereafter because there is no hereafter.
Right. And you found that appealing at 16?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, it was. I mean, it
Yeah,
was all about
of
kind of
course.
they say about indulgence, not compulsion, and all that kind of stuff. But like when you actually get down to it and spend time around any Satanist, it is quite often uh, compulsion over just pure moderated indulgence. And then you understand pretty quickly that these people are. Um, Influenced and in service of something outside of themselves, that the same way that like when you become, if you're an alcoholic or if you're addicted to something, there is something working through and within you that you have no control over. And so they make it seem like it's just about moderate indulgence, but um, you don't these cheap indulgences don't come for free. um, the more you do it, the more it sinks its hooks into you, and so it's not sustainable in any regard.
Right. You think you're being liberated, but you're becoming enslaved.
Correct. Yeah, and they think that they are the masters over that thing,
Right.
but they almost never are.
Right. And everything you explain about the material world being the tantamount to what LaVey is saying is the antithesis of like Christianity, where you're aiming for eternal life outside of the material world. Uh, Whereas this, how you're explaining it, is it's keeping you locked here, and everything you do is
100%.
to keep you here and to get all the riches and all the material wealth you can, or however whatever you can amass. That's important to you in terms of the material world. So sometime so you're 16, you're reading that book. Where do you go after that? Are you like seeking out more people who feel the same way? Are you going online finding people?
Uh, yeah, a lot of it was online at the time because I was still in Singapore. I didn't move back to the States until after I graduated high school, so I
Okay.
was 18. Um, and I ended up after Singapore, I was in West Texas and then Florida, and then I was in areas where there wasn't a ton of people. But I'm an introvert by nature, and I was more so into there's kind of when it comes to occultism, there's the practitioners and the researchers, and I was typically a researcher.
Hmm.
Um, yes, but then by the time I'd moved back, again, I had started having these inclinations that um, there was the fatal flaw in Satanism is that it relies on there being only the carnal, and through my like continued research and my own experiences, I was like, I don't necessarily think that is the case at all. Um, I feel like I've experienced and witnessed consciousness outside of human form, um, and and so like that can not be the thing. And if that's the case, then continuing in Satanism can only be detrimental. However, I was pretty locked into to what the so-called left-hand path, uh, and Luciferianism just kind of like seemed like the next step, logical step, because it was within the same vein. They're kind of like of the same ilk. However, Lucifer was presented as the light bringer, the white light that illuminates the knowledge that is hidden. And I was convinced that there is knowledge that is hidden, and that we as humans can um, learn, and we can find this knowledge, and it is there. And religion, like the Abrahamic monotheisms, um, credit where credit is due for whatever it was that I felt that they did at that time. I felt that it was almost spiritual malpractice to be resting on the laurels of your ancient texts, when we're living in an age where we have evolved and have better communication. We have the internet. We can find information about different cultures and people that have had different experiences. And I thought that it was a spiritual malpractice not to be continuing to look deeper into um, what is hidden and what can be found out in the here and now.
Was it
Uh,
was it that Satanism kind of ran its course, or
at,
like that the LaVey and like Luciferianism?
at that point, yes.
And what
Because
was it about Lucifer? Okay,
it
yeah, continue, please.
just because many of the Satanists that I spoke to I found unimpressive, and like I said, kind of like possessed by their carnal desires, which made them, you know, a slave to a substance that they claimed that they had under control, which they almost never did.
Hmm.
And then at the same time, when I was back in the States, I did for a short time uh, do some work, and it had some correspondence with people in the Satanic Temple, because the Church of Satan seemed to have kind of like become irrelevant. Um, and then the Satanic Temple was also just kind of like an activist group that cared. Like their main thing was abortion and everything, and like
Hmm.
that kind of ended up rubbing me the wrong way, because like one of the tenets of Satanism was not to harm children at all.
Hmm.
And I had this belief, like back when I thought that the carnal was everything, that if carnal life is all that we can experience, and if somebody is growing a child within them, that if left to natural devices will be able to experience the carnal life just as full as you or I. then the termination of that made no sense to me.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of funny sometimes when people think that abortion is strictly kind of like a Christian like idea. Like, I mean, you can approach it from almost any angle, I believe.
Yeah, that's funny. I just saw an interview actually yesterday with Kevin Posobiec, Jack Posobiec's brother, who was interviewing like a pink-haired, I think, socialist at the March for Life, and she was there because she was marching for life, and she had just a different angle on being pro-life. But I found it interesting. Was there anyone else in your like community who felt the same way as you, or did you express that to anyone else?
No, no, it was just pretty. I was pretty much the only one, especially with the Satanic Temple, because like 90% of the advocacy work that the Satanic Temple does is quote unquote reproductive freedoms, and abortion and
Interesting.
stuff.
Interesting.
Um,
So they direct a lot of
yes,
energy towards like the pro-choice human sacrifice lobby.
I'm sorry. Say again.
Like I'd consider all that stuff like human sacrifice. So you're saying
Sure. Yes.
they put a lot of energy towards promoting that. Like that's one of their major things. What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. Especially in particular the Detroit chapter. For a while, all their advocacy was yeah basically being pro-abortion. They had merchandise that said "Thank God for abortion" and things like that. It was kind of
Wow.
it's unsettling.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so you were saying you were talking to some of these churches and moving towards Luciferianism. What is the like real difference between the two?
Um, so Satan Satan kind of like as is known as the master of the earth and the material realm, and like I mean that even comports within Christianity. Um, and Luciferianism just leaves, or it branded itself at least as a intellectual pursuit into spiritualism, into the knowledge that has been both hidden and also neglected, um, and the imagery of Lucifer as the morning star, like the rising sun, the bringer of light,
Hmm.
is supposed to be like the guiding torch that you bring with you into the void, to sort of light your path and to reveal, the hidden knowledges.
Looking back, was it similarly destructive in ways that Satanism was, or asking for those types of rituals?
It certainly can be. Um, when you get into Luciferian study and the Luciferian intellect, that's when um, you become less of like a Satanist or less of a Luciferianism, less of a Luciferian and more of an occultist, capital O.
Hmm.
Because once you start getting into those areas of study, it's every text refers to several other occultists, and then you follow those names, and then they refer to several other occultists. So you um, end up studying uh, the Kabbalah and Hermes Trismegistus, and then you end up studying Agrippa, and then Manly P. Hall, and all of these people. So it's a lot more of a broader tent, and at that point, you can kind of there are orders, uh, Hermetic orders, Luciferian orders, and different organizations that you can then, um, if you feel kind of like a calling towards, kind of like learn uh, their teaching specifically.
Hmm.
However, I was more of a broad tent kind of occultist. I spoke with people within different orders without. I never went through any rites or initiations or anything like that. I strictly and intentionally stayed away from stuff like that.
So there were different cults within Luciferianism that were geared towards very specific, like rituals or people, kind of like how Greek gods had their own churches and people would worship one god over the other, and then all of them at the same
Yes,
time.
yes.